The guy in seat 14C turned to me the moment I buckled in, his eyes narrowing at the photo on my phone screen. My late husband Jake smiling back at me from our wedding day in a San Francisco park. "You one of those?" he sneered, his voice carrying across the row like a slap in the quiet hum of the cabin. Flying around like it's normal, shoving it in everybody's face. I closed the phone, my heart pounding harder than the engines spooling up on the runway, but I didn't answer. This was supposed to be a simple red-eye from Chicago to San Francisco after my uncle's funeral, a chance to bury old ghosts with the family that still couldn't look me in the eye. But what happened next forced every passenger on that plane to stand up and show respect just minutes later. The Boeing 737 lifted off smoothly into the night sky over Illinois, the city lights shrinking below us like fading memories. Mark, that was the name on his boarding pass, wasn't finished. He leaned closer, breath smelling of the whiskey he'd knocked back in the lounge. My brother's right behind us, and he doesn't need to see the kind of thing, you know? Some people are trying to raise kids right. His brother in 15C was already dozing, earbuds in, oblivious. I stared out the window at the dark clouds, thinking about Jake, how he would have squeezed my hand and whispered something sarcastic to make me laugh. 2 years since the cancer took him, and the ache still sat in my chest like an unhealed fracture. I'd come to Chicago alone because my mother had begged me not to bring that lifestyle to the service. 24 hours of tight smiles and avoided glances, and now this. Then happened. Mark's brother suddenly jerked upright, clutching his chest, face turning an alarming shade of gray. "Help! Somebody! He can't breathe!" Mark shouted, panic cracking his voice. The cabin lights flickered as flight attendants rushed forward, but the man was already slumping, pulse thready under my fingers when I reached him. "I'm a doctor," I said calmly, years of ER shifts and disaster zone rotations kicking in. I tilted his head, started compressions, counting out loud while the attendant grabbed the AED. The plane was still climbing, seatbelt sign glowing, but no one moved to stop me. Shock after shock, his rhythm returned just as the captain came over the intercom asking for any medical personnel. I kept working until the man stabilized, color creeping back into his cheeks. Mark stood there frozen, tears streaking his face, watching me save his only brother. The flight attendant whispered furiously into her headset. A minute later, the captain's voice filled the cabin again, steady and clear. "Ladies and gentlemen, we've stabilized the medical emergency thanks to Dr. Ethan Carter in row 14. He's not just any passenger. He's a renowned cardiologist who volunteered in earthquake zones and hurricane relief, and he's been an outspoken advocate for LGBTQ health equity ever since losing his husband. Please, everyone, stand and give this hero the respect he deserves." Seatbelts clicked open across the cabin. Passengers rose one by one, clapping, some wiping their eyes. Mark stood too, hands shaking as he met my gaze. The applause swelled, warm and genuine, washing over the rows like sunlight breaking through storm clouds. I sat back down as the seatbelt sign came on again, the weight of their respect settling on my shoulders heavier than any metal. My mind, still buzzing from adrenaline, drifted back to where all of this really began. A humid summer in small-town Ohio when I was 15 and the word gay felt like both a secret and a sentence. I remember the first time I said it out loud, alone in my bedroom after practice, staring at my reflection in the mirror. Tommy from the baseball team had smiled at me in the locker room that day, and something inside me clicked into place. But when I told my parents at dinner a month later, the silence that followed was louder than any shout. My father set his fork down slowly, eyes hard. "We didn't raise you like that, Ethan." My mother cried in her napkin, whispering prayers I'd heard every Sunday. That night, I lay awake, wondering if love could ever be worth the cost of losing everything I knew. The next morning, my father drove me to church camp to fix it, but all it did was teach me how to hide better. I smiled through youth group, dated girls I didn't want, and buried the truth so deep I almost forgot it existed. Until college. The plane leveled out at cruising altitude, the cabin lights dimming for the overnight flight. I closed my eyes, letting the memories play like an old film reel. The day I stepped onto the University of Michigan campus, duffel bag over my shoulder and freedom in my lungs, felt like the first real breath I'd taken in years. No one knew me there. I could be Ethan, not the preacher's son with a secret. I joined the pre-med club, stayed late in the library, and slowly let myself notice the guy who always saved the seat next to him in anatomy lab. Jake, with his easy laugh and kind eyes that saw straight through every wall I'd built. We became study partners first, then friends who grabbed coffee after exams. One rainy October night, walking back to the dorms under a shared umbrella, Jake stopped under a streetlight and said, "You don't have to pretend around me, Ethan. I see you." That was the moment everything changed. My first kiss, tentative and trembling, tasted like possibility. We moved in together junior year, cooked terrible pasta in our tiny kitchen, and planned a future that felt real. But coming out to my family again, this time with Jake beside me, reopened every old wound. My father hung up the phone. My mother sent a card that said, "We're praying for you," and nothing else. I learned then that love wasn't just joy. It was the courage to keep choosing it even when the world pushed back. Mark shifted in his seat beside me, clearing his throat like he wanted to speak but didn't know how. I didn't push. The applause had died down, but the energy in the cabin had shifted. People glancing at me with quiet nods, a mother across the aisle offering me her bottled water with a soft "Thank you, doctor." For the first time in a long while, the weight on my chest felt a little lighter, as if the respect from strangers had cracked open a door I'd nailed shut after Jake's funeral. But the real story, the one that made me who I was, still stretched behind me like the contrail we left across the Midwest sky. College flew by in a blur of late-night cramming and stolen weekends. Jake and I graduated together, him in public health, me headed straight into medical school at Stanford because California felt far enough from Ohio to breathe. We packed a U-Haul and drove west, singing off-key to the radio, stopping in every small town just because we could. The first apartment in Palo Alto was a shoebox with leaky windows, but it was ours. I proposed on the Golden Gate Bridge at sunset with a simple silver band I'd saved 6 months for. Jake said yes before I finished the question, laughing through happy tears while tourists clapped around us. We got married the next spring in a backyard ceremony with friends who became our chosen family. No blood relatives in the photos, but the love in that yard was louder than any church bell. Residency was brutal. 36-hour shifts, patients who reminded me of my own fears, and the constant ache of knowing my parents still hadn't met Jake. I call home on holidays and hear the careful distance in my mother's voice. "We love you, Ethan. We just don't understand." Jake would rub my shoulders afterward and remind me that understanding wasn't a prerequisite for living. He was my anchor, the one who made burnt toast on bad days and celebrated every small victory with cheap champagne. We talked about adopting someday, about opening a clinic together for underserved communities. Life felt solid, the kind of future I once believed I didn't deserve. Then the cracks appeared in ways I never saw coming. My closest friend from med school, Derek, the straight guy who'd stood up for me at our wedding, started pulling away after I got promoted to chief resident. At first I thought it was jealousy over hours, but one night at a bar he cornered me. "Look, Ethan, people are talking. You and Jake, it's affecting the program's image. Maybe tone it down." The betrayal stung deeper than any family rejection. I trusted him with my truth, and now he was asking me to shrink it. Jake held me that night while I raged and cried, whispering that real friends don't demand you hide. I chose to keep shining anyway. I started volunteering in an LGBTQ youth clinic on weekends, treating kids who reminded me of 15-year-old me. The work grounded me, reminded me why I'd fought so hard to become a doctor. Residency ended, and we bought our first real house in the Sunset District, a fixer-upper with a view of the ocean on clear days. Jake proposed we foster, and we brought home a shy 14-year-old named Miguel who'd been kicked out by his own parents for being gay. Watching Miguel bloom under our roof healed something in me I didn't know was broken. He called us dads after 6 months, and the sound cracked my heart wide open. My mother even sent a birthday card to Miguel that year, a small olive branch that felt like progress. Life was good, messy and full in hours. Then the diagnosis came. Jake started coughing during a hike in Marin, blaming allergies. 3 weeks later, the oncologist sat us down and said the word that changed everything: lymphoma, stage 4. The room spun. The doctor who saved strangers, couldn't save the man I loved. We fought it with everything: chemo, experimental trials, late night drives to the beach when the pain got too bad. I turned down a prestigious fellowship in New York to stay home and care for him. Friends rotated shifts, bringing soup and sitting with him when I had to work. Miguel, now 18 and in community college, moved back in to help. The sacrifices piled up, but every moment with Jake felt borrowed and precious. He slipped away on a quiet Tuesday morning with the sun coming through our bedroom window, my hand in his. I sat there for hours afterward, the house too still, the future we'd planned suddenly hollow. Grief swallowed me whole. I took a leave from the hospital, wandered the city in a fog, angry at the world, at God, at myself for not being enough. Friends dragged me to support groups. Miguel refused to let me shut down. "Dad wouldn't want this," he'd say, forcing me to eat. Slowly, painfully, I started volunteering again at the youth clinic, then full-time research on cardiac complications in LGBTQ patients, work that felt like carrying Jake's life forward. I testified before Congress on healthcare equity. The advocacy gave me purpose, but the loneliness lingered like a shadow. The plane hit a pocket of mild turbulence, jolting me back to the present. Mark was staring at his brother, who was now resting comfortably with oxygen in and 4. He turned to me, voice rough. "I didn't know about any of it. I'm sorry." I nodded, too exhausted for more. The respect from the cabin still hummed around us, but my mind kept drifting to the years after Jake, the quiet rebuilding that had brought me here. The first year without Jake blurred into hospital shifts and empty evenings. I threw myself into research, publishing papers on disparities in heart care for gay men that caught national attention. Colleagues invited me to conferences. Strangers emailed thank yous. Miguel graduated and moved to LA for film school, but we talked every week. My mother started calling more often, tentative conversations about the weather, then about Miguel, then finally about me. "Your father watches your interviews sometimes," she admitted once. It wasn't forgiveness, but it was something. I flew home for Christmas that year alone, sat through awkward dinners, and left feeling both heavier and lighter. Then came the invitation that changed the trajectory again. A humanitarian organization asked me to lead a medical team in Haiti after the earthquake. 6 weeks intense with limited supplies, treating crush injuries and infections under generator lights. The work exhausted me and saved me. I came home with new scars and a clearer sense of who I was becoming. Not just Jake's widower, but a man who chose hope every day. Back in San Francisco, I reopened the youth clinic full-time, mentoring kids who reminded me daily why visibility mattered. One boy, 15 and terrified, told me my story online had given him the courage to come out. That single conversation healed more than any therapy session. Life settled into a rhythm of work, ocean runs, and quiet nights reading Jake's old journals. I dated once or twice, coffee with kind men who understood loss, but nothing stuck. The heart has its own timeline. Friends worried I was closing off, but I felt content carrying Jake's memory without letting it define every tomorrow. When my uncle died suddenly in Chicago, my mother called crying. "Please come, Ethan. The family needs you." I booked the ticket without hesitation, knowing the side eyes would come, but also knowing I'd survived worse. That brings me back to the plane, to Mark now silent beside his sleeping brother, to the lingering applause still echoing in my ears. The respect felt earned in a way family approval never had. I'd spent decades choosing courage over comfort, love over fear, truth over silence. And somehow, 30,000 feet above the country that raised me, strangers had seen it without needing the whole story. The years after Haiti blurred into steady progress at the hospital. I became director of cardiology outreach, launching mobile clinics in underserved neighborhoods where patients looked like the kids I once mentored. Miguel visited often, bringing LA energy and stories of additions that made me laugh until my sides hurt. We planted a small memorial garden for Jake behind the house. Lavender and roses he would have loved. On quiet Sundays, I'd sit there with coffee and talk to him out loud, updating him on life like he could hear. The grief softened into something gentler, a companion rather than a wound. Family dynamics shifted in small, surprising ways. My sister started texting memes and asking about my work. My father sent a handwritten note after seeing me on a national news segment about LGBTQ veterans' health. Just 2 lines. Proud of the doctor you became. Miss you. I cried in my car after reading it. Progress wasn't dramatic speeches or grand gestures. It was these fragile bridges built one honest conversation at a time. I flew to Ohio for my nephew's graduation, sat in the back row, and watched my family cheer for him while stealing glances at me with something close to acceptance. Work took me to Washington twice that year for congressional briefings. I stood in front of lawmakers and spoke about the real cost of stigma, the delayed care, the mental health crises, the lives lost because someone was afraid to be seen. Each time I pictured Jake in the front row, nodding with that proud smile. The advocacy felt like the best way to keep his spirit alive. Between trips, I mentored residents, some of them young gay doctors navigating the same fears I once had. Watching them thrive reminded me how far the world had come, even if the journey was still unfinished. The night before the Chicago flight, I packed slowly, folding the photo of Jake into my carry-on like a talisman. Miguel called from LA. "You've got this, Dad. Come home soon. I've got tickets to a Giants game." I smiled into the phone, grateful for the family I'd built beyond blood. The next morning at O'Hare, I boarded the plane carrying 34 years of choices, some painful, all mine, never imagining the stranger in 14C would become part of the next chapter. Now, hours into the flight, Mark's brother stirred and asked weakly for water. Mark handed it over, then turned to me again. "You saved his life. After everything I said, I don't deserve your help." His voice cracked. I shrugged, the exhaustion making honesty easier. Nobody deserves to lose family, not over who they love. He nodded, eyes down, the earlier sneer replaced by something raw and human. The cabin had grown quiet again, but the atmosphere felt different, warmer, like the respect had rippled outward and changed the air itself. Landing in San Francisco felt like coming home to open arms. Miguel waited at the gate with flowers and a hug that squeezed the last of the trip's tension out of me. "You look like you fought a war," he teased, but his eyes were proud. We drove home along the familiar coast, windows down, the Pacific glittering under the morning sun. I told him the whole story, the mocking, the emergency, the standing ovation. He whistled low. "See? The world's catching up, Dad. Slowly, but it is." The days that followed brought quiet reflection. I returned to the clinic, patients greeting me with new warmth after the story somehow made local news. A passenger had posted a video. Colleagues clapped me on the back in the hallway. But the real shift happened inside. For the first time since Jake's death, I felt ready to imagine new chapters without guilt. Not replacing him, nothing could, but adding to the story he helped start. I joined a hiking group for LGBTQ professionals, went on a few low-pressure dinners, and let myself laugh without checking if it was okay. My mother called the following weekend. "I saw the video online. Your father watched it twice." Her voice trembled. "We're sorry it took strangers on a plane to show us what we should have seen all along." We talked for an hour, real talk, the kind with tears and long pauses and forgiveness that didn't need perfect words. She asked about Miguel's new job and whether I was eating properly. Small steps, but they felt like mountains moved. Mark texted a week later. He'd gotten my number from the airline. "My brother's home and doing great. Thank you again. I was wrong about everything. If you're ever in Chicago, coffee's on me." I stared at the message a long time before replying. "Safe travels to you both. Take care of each other." Closure didn't always come with grand speeches. Sometimes it arrived in a simple text from a changed man. The garden bloomed brighter that spring. I added Jake's favorite wildflowers and sat there one evening watching the sunset, feeling his presence not as absence, but as quiet encouragement. The boy who once hid in Ohio had become a doctor who saved lives, an advocate who changed policies, a father who built a family from love instead of fear. Every scar, every sacrifice, every moment of doubt had led here, to a life that felt authentically mine. Months passed in the gentle rhythm of San Francisco days. I testified again in Sacramento on expanded healthcare access, this time with Miguel in the audience holding a sign that read, "Proud of my dad." The standing ovation there felt familiar now, less surprising than the one on the plane. Friends threw a small party after, toasting to growth and second chances. I raised my glass to Jake's memory and to every person still fighting to be seen. The journey wasn't over. Identity work never is, but I walked it now with lighter steps and open hands. One quiet evening, Miguel and I cooked Jake's favorite pasta recipe, burning the garlic like old times and laughing until we cried. He looked at me across the table. "You've come so far." The guy on that plane? He was just one more obstacle you turned into a stepping stone. I nodded, throat tight. The respect from strangers had been powerful, but the real honor came from living the truth every single day. Looking back at the flight that started it all, I realized the mocking stranger and the sudden applause were bookends to the same lesson. People see only the surface until life forces them to look deeper. My family, my colleagues, even Mark, they all had to witness the full story before respect followed. The boy from Ohio who once prayed to be normal had grown into a man who understood that normal was never the goal. Authenticity was. The plane incident taught me that courage isn't loud speeches or heroic saves alone. It's the daily choice to show up as yourself, even when the seat next to you is hostile. It's loving fiercely after loss. It's forgiving slowly when family catches up. And sometimes it's a quiet cardiologist on a red eye who refuses to shrink, and the universe answers with an entire cabin on its feet. True or false? One act of bravery can instantly erase years of prejudice against gay men.